I found my wife's wedding ring in the cup holder of my best friend's truck at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, and for about 3 seconds I honestly thought I was looking at somebody else's life. My hands just froze there over the cold metal, my brain trying to force a normal explanation into a moment that already felt rotten. Then I looked up through the windshield and saw my own front porch light switch off from inside the house, even though my wife had texted me 20 minutes earlier. "I'm in bed already, don't wake me when you get home." That was the exact second something inside me dropped. Not snapped, not broke clean, just dropped like an elevator cable had been cut. I need to explain why I was even in his truck, because that part sounds insane by itself. My friend Nate had called me earlier asking if I could grab a folder he left under the passenger seat because he was stuck at the office and needed it first thing in the morning. Nate was not just some random buddy either. He was my guy, the one who stood next to me at my wedding, the one who came over for barbecues, the one my wife Jenna hugged a little too casually and I ignored because I thought that was what trust looked like. So I pulled into his driveway on my way home, used the spare coat he'd given me years ago, opened the truck, and there it was. Jenna's ring, the one she swore she stopped wearing to the gym because it pinched her finger. I actually laughed when I saw it, but it wasn't real laughter. It was that hollow, panicked kind that comes out when your body knows the truth before your pride catches up. I remember whispering, No, come on, don't do this to me," like reality was a person I could negotiate with. When I got home, Jenna was standing in the kitchen in one of my old college shirts, barefoot, holding a glass of water like she'd been posing for innocence. She looked at me, then at the ring in my hand, and I watched her do the math in real time. Not guilt first, which somehow hurt worse, but strategy. "Why are you going through people's things?" she asked me, and I swear that sentence changed me more than the ring did. I just stared at her and said, "That's really your opening line?" She rolled her eyes, and said, "Michael, if you're going to come in here acting paranoid, I'm not doing this tonight." Acting paranoid. I can still hear it. I held up the ring and said, "Then tell me why this was in Nate's truck." She didn't answer right away, which was answer enough, but then she crossed her arms and hit me with, "Maybe because I dropped it there a week ago when he helped me move those storage bins, but of course you turned it into something disgusting." She said it so smoothly that for 1 second, I almost wanted to believe her just so I wouldn't have to keep standing in the middle of my own kitchen feeling humiliated. But the lie collapsed faster than she expected, because while she was talking, her phone lit up on the counter. She lunged for it too late. I saw Nate's name, and under it, just 6 words. Did he find out about us? I don't think I breathed after that. I just looked at the screen, then at her, and the room went so quiet, it felt underwater. Jenna snatched the phone and hissed, "You were not supposed to see that," which might be the cruelest thing anybody has ever said to me because it told me this wasn't a mistake. It was a whole hidden world with rules and timing and roles, and I was the only idiot not reading from the script. I asked her, real calm, "How long?" And she said, "It's not what you think," which is what people say when it's exactly what you think and worse. Then she added, "You've been gone emotionally for months," like she had already prepared my blame and wrapped it up for me. I was still trying to process my best friend and my wife detonating my life in secret when her phone buzzed again, and this time the preview on the lock screen made my stomach turn so hard I had to grip the counter. It wasn't Nate. It was my sister. And the message said, "She knows you panicked. Stop texting me." I thought seeing Nate's name on my wife's phone was the kind of pain you don't come back from. I was wrong, because the message from my sister made that betrayal split open into something even uglier. In 1 second, the affair stopped being a secret between 2 selfish people and turned into proof that people I loved had been standing around the wreckage of my marriage, watching me smile through it. I remember looking at Jenna like I didn't know what species she was anymore, because once my sister's name flashed across that screen, every memory I had from the last few months started rearranging itself into something sick. The weird tension at family dinners, The way my sister Lauren stopped making eye contact when she asked how things were going. The two of them disappearing into the kitchen together at my birthday while I stood outside flipping burgers for people who apparently knew more about my marriage than I did. I asked Jenna, "Why is my sister texting you about this?" And she clutched that phone to her chest like she was protecting something sacred, then hit me with that same icy tone she used whenever she wanted to make me feel unstable. "Because not everything is about you, Michael." I actually laughed at that, a harsh, cracked sound that didn't even feel human coming out of me, and I said, "That's funny, because my wife sleeping with my best friend and texting my sister about it feels a little bit about me." She flinched, not because I hurt her, but because I'd finally said it out loud and dragged the thing into the light where she couldn't keep shaping it with her words. Then the gaslighting started in full. Jenna began pacing the kitchen, talking faster, throwing out half-truths and blame like smoke bombs. She said Nate had been there for her when I was too distracted with work, that Lauren only knew because Jenna needed someone safe to talk to, that I was proving her point by getting angry, which is the kind of manipulation that can make a man question his own pulse. I said, "You needed someone safe, so you chose my best friend, and then my sister helped you hide it?" And she snapped back, "Lauren didn't help me hide anything. She just understands what it's like to feel invisible." That sentence landed harder than I expected, because my sister's marriage had been falling apart for a year, and I had spent nights on the phone with her, listening, supporting her, telling her she deserved honesty. The humiliation of that almost took my legs out from under me. I had been the dependable brother, the good husband, the fool everybody came to for comfort while they built a second reality behind my back. I told Jenna to call Lauren right there in front of me, and at first she refused, saying it was late and that I was spiraling. But when I stepped toward the door and said I'd drive to my sister's house myself, her face changed. Not guilty, not ashamed, just cornered. She called. Lauren answered on the second ring, and before Jenna could say a word, I took the phone and said, "Tell me exactly what you know." There was silence, then this shaky exhale, and my own sister said, "Mike, please let me explain before you assume the worst." I felt something cold spread through my chest, because that is not what you say when there's an innocent explanation waiting. I asked her again, and she said, almost whispering, "I found out about Nate months ago, but Jenna told me it was over, and I believed her, and I didn't want to destroy you unless I was sure." Months. She said months like it was a unit of time a person could survive hearing attached to that kind of lie. I turned and looked at Jenna, and she was crying now, but even that looked dishonest, like she had reached for the tears because the words stopped working. I should have hung up, but I didn't, because once your life starts collapsing, some dark part of you wants every beam to come down at once. So I asked Lauren the question I didn't want the answer to, the one already burning in my throat. I said, "Is it really over?" My sister went quiet so long I could hear Jenna breathing beside me. Then Lauren said, "Mike, there's something else you need to know about Nate." And the way she said it told me whatever came next was going to make the affair look like the smaller problem. I thought the worst part was knowing my wife had been with my best friend, while my sister stood by and said nothing. I was wrong, because the hesitation in Lauren's voice carried something heavier than guilt, something that felt planned, like I was about to be handed a truth everyone else had already rehearsed. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just catching up to a mistake. I was catching up to a story that had been unfolding without me for a long time. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my hand started to shake, not from anger anymore, but from this creeping dread that kept telling me, "Whatever she says next, you're not ready for it." I said her name again, quieter this time. "Lauren, what else?" And she exhaled like she had been holding this in for weeks, maybe months. "Nate didn't just start something with Jenna," she said slowly, choosing every word like it could cut her. "He came to me first." For a second, I didn't understand what she meant, like my brain refused to line the words up into anything real. I asked, "What does that mean?" And she said, "He told me he thought you and Jenna were falling apart, that she felt alone, and that he was trying to help her." Trying to help her. I actually closed my eyes when she said that, because I could hear Nate's voice in my head, that calm, reasonable tone he used whenever he gave advice, and it made me feel sick. Lauren kept going, her voice shaking more now. "He asked me if I thought you were still happy, if I noticed distance between you two, and I told him you seemed stressed, but I never said you didn't love her." I turned to look at Jenna, and she wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. That was new. Up until now, she had been defiant, controlled, twisting everything. But hearing that Nate had been laying groundwork, talking to my sister, building a narrative about my marriage before anything even happened, that cracked something in her. I said, barely above a whisper, "So he was setting this up?" And Lauren didn't answer right away, which felt like confirmation. Then she said something that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't think was possible. "Mike, I think Jenna knew." The room felt smaller after that, like the walls had leaned in just to watch me fall apart. I asked Jenna directly, "Did you know he was talking to Lauren about us?" And she shook her head too quickly, too sharply. "No, I didn't. He's twisting things," she said, but her voice didn't have that same confidence anymore. It sounded thin, fragile, like it couldn't carry the weight of what was happening. I turned back to the phone and said, "Lauren, don't protect her. Just tell me the truth." And she hesitated again before saying, "There were times Jenna would mention conversations Nate had, things she shouldn't have known unless he told her he'd talked to me." That was the moment it shifted from betrayal to something darker. This wasn't just two people making a bad decision. This was conversations, alignment, shared information, pieces moving behind my back like I was some problem they were trying to solve together. I felt exposed in a way I can't fully explain, like my private struggles, my stress, the nights I came home exhausted and quiet, had all been analyzed and repurposed into justification for what they were doing. I said, more to myself than anyone, "You both talked about me like I wasn't even in the room," and Jenna finally snapped, "Because you weren't in the room, Michael. You checked out a long time ago." And there it was again. That attempt to rewrite everything, to make my confusion look like absence, my trust look like neglect. I was about to respond, something angry, something I wouldn't be able to take back, but Lauren's voice cut in again, sharper this time, urgent. "Mike, there's one more thing," she said, and I felt my stomach drop because I didn't think there was anything left that could still surprise me. I said, "What now?" And she answered in a way that made the entire situation tilt sideways. "The night you think this started, it didn't. It goes back further than that, way further, before the promotion, before the move, before your wedding." I thought I had already reached the point where nothing could shock me anymore. I was wrong, because hearing that word, before, attached to my own wedding made everything I thought I understood about my life feel like a lie that had been carefully built around me. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was history being rewritten in real time. I remember my voice coming out low, almost unrecognizable, when I said, "Lauren, what do you mean before the wedding?" And there was this long pause on the line where I could hear her breathing, like she was standing at the edge of something she didn't know how to say without destroying me. "I didn't know back then," she said quickly, like she needed to defend herself before the truth even landed. "I only put it together recently, after everything started coming out. But Nate told me something when he was drinking a few weeks ago." My heart started pounding so hard it felt physical, like it was trying to force me out of the moment. "He said there was a night, during your engagement, where things crossed a line." I didn't look at Jenna right away. I couldn't. I just stared at the floor, trying to process how far back this went, trying to find one solid memory that hadn't been contaminated by whatever this was. Engagement. That was supposed to be the good time, the hopeful time, the part of the story you look back on when everything else gets hard. I asked, "What kind of line?" even though I already knew the answer didn't matter anymore. Lauren hesitated, then said softly, "He said it was a mistake, that it only happened once back then, and that they both agreed to bury it." Bury it. I finally looked up at Jenna when I heard that, and she was already shaking her head, tears running down her face now. But it didn't feel like remorse. It felt like panic. "That's not true," she said quickly, stepping toward me. "He's twisting it. He's trying to drag me down with him." Her voice cracked in the middle, and for a second I saw the version of her I used to trust, the one who used to come to me when things felt overwhelming. But it didn't last, because right underneath that was something else, something defensive and desperate. I asked her, "Did anything happen between you and Nate before we got married?" And she didn't answer. She just kept shaking her head, repeating, "It's not how he's saying it," which wasn't a denial. Not really. It was a dodge. I felt something inside me shift then, something colder than anger. "You're not answering the question," I said, and she finally snapped, "because you're not asking it fairly," which made no sense, but somehow still managed to put me on the defensive for half a second. That's what she did. That's what I'm only now starting to fully understand. She didn't just lie. She made me question whether I even had the right to ask. I turned back to the phone and said, "Lauren, when did this happen?" And she answered, "The night of Nate's birthday party. The one you left early because you had that early meeting the next morning." And just like that, I remembered it. I remembered hugging Jenna goodbye that night, telling her not to stay out too late, trusting that my best friend and my fiancé were the last two people in the world I'd ever need to worry about. I remembered Nate texting me the next day, joking about how I missed all the fun, and I had laughed, sitting in my office, completely unaware that the foundation of my future had already cracked underneath me. I whispered, more to myself than anyone, "So you let me marry you anyway?" And Jenna stepped closer, reaching for my arm. "Michael, please. It wasn't like that. We were confused. It didn't mean anything." And I pulled back before she could touch me. That word, confused, hit me like an insult. You don't accidentally build something like this out of confusion. You build it out of choices. I thought that was the bottom, that realizing my marriage had been built on something buried would be the final blow. But Lauren spoke again, her voice breaking this time in a way that made my chest tighten for a completely different reason. "Mike, I didn't tell you the worst part yet," she said quietly, and I felt this heavy, sinking certainty settle over me that whatever came next wasn't just about Jenna and Nate anymore. "After that night, they didn't just bury it," she added. "They kept talking. I thought hearing that they had crossed a line before my wedding was the part that would break me completely. I was wrong, because knowing they kept talking after, that turned it into something ongoing, something intentional, something that lived quietly alongside my entire marriage like a second, hidden version of it. It wasn't a mistake they buried. It was a connection they chose to keep alive." I stood there in my own kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at Jenna like I was trying to recognize a stranger wearing her face. "What do you mean they kept talking?" I asked, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt, like something inside me had gone numb just to survive the moment. Lauren hesitated again, then said, "I didn't know how often, but Nate told me it never really stopped. Even after you got married, even after you moved, they would check in with each other." Check in. Like it was something harmless, like two people catching up instead of maintaining a secret thread that ran through my entire relationship. I looked at Jenna and said, "So while I was building a life with you, you were still talking to him behind my back?" And she immediately shook her head, stepping closer again, desperate now. "It wasn't like that, Michael. It wasn't constant. It was just occasional," she said, and I almost smiled at that because of how small she was trying to make something that had already consumed everything. "Occasional?" I repeated. "You had history with him before we got married, and you still kept him in your life secretly, and I'm supposed to believe that was nothing?" She ran her hands through her hair, pacing now, losing control of the calm persona she had been clinging to. "You're twisting it," she said, her voice sharper. "You're making it sound like some long-term affair when it wasn't like that." That word again, wasn't like that. I was starting to realize that phrase was her shield. Something vague enough to avoid the truth, but strong enough to push back on mine. I turned back to the phone. "Lauren, how did you even find all this out?" I asked. And this time she didn't hesitate as long. "Because Jenna came to me a few months ago," she said quietly, "and she was scared." That made my stomach drop again. "Scared of what?" I asked, and Lauren answered, "Scared that Nate was going to tell you everything." I slowly lowered myself into one of the kitchen chairs because my legs didn't feel stable anymore. I looked at Jenna and said, "You weren't going to tell me, were you? You were just waiting to see if he would." She didn't answer right away, and that silence said everything. Then she said, softer now, almost pleading, "I didn't want to hurt you." And I just shook my head because that sentence felt insulting at this point. "You didn't want to hurt me, so you let me live in it," I said, and she whispered, "I was trying to fix it before it came out." Like that made it better, like cleaning up a lie before it's exposed somehow makes it less of a lie. Lauren spoke again, her voice more urgent now, like she was trying to get everything out before she lost the chance. "Mike, there's more. When Jenna came to me, she showed me messages," she said, and my chest tightened again because I knew whatever those messages contained, I wasn't ready for it. "What messages?" I asked, and Lauren took a breath before answering. "Messages between her and Nate, and they weren't just casual check-ins." I closed my eyes for a second, bracing myself, but it didn't help. Nothing was helping anymore. "What were they about?" I asked, and Lauren's next words felt like they reached through the phone and grabbed me. "They talked about you," she said, "not just occasionally, not just in passing. They talked about your marriage, like it was something they were both inside of." I thought the worst part was that they had been talking behind my back for years, quietly keeping something alive that should have never existed. I was wrong, because hearing that they talked about me, about my marriage like it was something they both had access to, made me realize I hadn't just been betrayed. I had been studied. I remember sitting there staring at nothing while Lauren's words echoed in my head like they were trying to settle into something permanent. "What do you mean they talked about me?" I asked, and my voice came out slower now, like I was afraid of the answer but couldn't stop myself from asking anyway. Lauren didn't soften it. "I mean they would analyze things," she said quietly. "Arguments you had, times you seemed distant, things you said. Nate would tell her how to respond, how to handle you." That was the moment something inside me didn't just hurt, it shifted. It felt like every private moment I thought belonged to just us had been opened up and discussed somewhere else, like I had unknowingly been part of conversations I was never invited to. I looked at Jenna, really looked at her, and suddenly all these small memories started surfacing in ways they never had before. The way she would sometimes respond to me with this calm, almost rehearsed tone during arguments, like she already knew where the conversation was going. The way she'd say things that sounded guided, like they weren't fully hers. I asked her, "Did he tell you what to say to me?" And she immediately shook her head, too fast again. "No, that's not fair. You're making it sound manipulative," she said, but her voice didn't have any strength behind it. I leaned forward, my hands clasped together just to stop them from shaking, and said, "Then why does it feel like I've been talking to both of you this whole time instead of just my wife?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, and that silence was louder than anything she could have said. Lauren spoke again, her voice more emotional now, like she was finally letting herself feel the weight of what she was saying. "Mike, there were messages where Nate would predict how you'd react to things, and Jenna would say he was right," she admitted, and I felt this deep, burning humiliation settle into my chest. Not just betrayal, not just lies, but being reduced to something predictable, something manageable, something they could both navigate together while I thought I was living an honest life. I stood up slowly, because sitting there felt unbearable now, like I was shrinking into the realization. "So you both built this version of me," I said, looking at Jenna. "And then you used it against me." She stepped toward me again, tears falling freely now, but I couldn't read them anymore. "That's not what this was, Michael. You're twisting everything," she said, her voice breaking. But there was still that familiar edge underneath it, that need to control the narrative even now. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "Because right now it sounds like you and him were in a relationship where I was the topic." She covered her face for a second, then dropped her hands and said something that made my stomach turn in a completely new way. "It wasn't just about you," she whispered. I felt my chest tighten again. "What does that mean?" I asked, and she hesitated, which was always the tell, always the moment where the truth was sitting right there, but she was deciding how much of it I deserved to hear. Lauren didn't wait this time. Her voice cut in, sharper than before, like she couldn't let Jenna shape it anymore. "Mike, those messages didn't just stay between them," she said. I turned back to the phone slowly, dread settling in again. "What are you talking about?" I asked. And Lauren answered in a way that made everything collapse into something even bigger than I thought possible. There were other people reading them too. I thought the worst part was realizing my wife and my best friend had turned my life into something they could analyze and control behind my back. I was wrong, because hearing that other people had been reading those messages made it feel like my entire life had been turned into something public, something observed. I didn't even recognize my own voice when I said, "Other people," because it came out hollow, like the meaning hadn't fully landed yet. Lauren didn't rush it this time. She let the silence sit for a second, like she understood that once she said it clearly, there was no going back. "Mike, Nate showed some of those conversations to people," she said carefully. "Not everyone, not constantly, but enough that it wasn't just between them anymore." My chest tightened so hard it actually hurt, like my body was trying to reject the reality of what I was hearing. "Who?" I asked, and that one word felt heavier than anything else I'd said that night. Jenna stepped in quickly, almost too quickly, like she was trying to contain the damage before it spread further. "It wasn't like that," she said, shaking her head, her voice fragile but urgent. "He exaggerated things. He twisted conversations. I didn't know he was showing anyone." I turned to her slowly and said, "You didn't know, or you didn't ask." Because at this point, the difference mattered more than anything. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, and that hesitation told me more than her words ever could. I looked back at the phone. "Lauren, who knew?" I asked again, and she finally answered. "Some of his co-workers, a couple mutual friends, and—" She hesitated, and I felt that dread again, that sinking feeling that something worse was coming. "And who?" I pushed, my voice sharper now, and she said it quietly. "My husband." That hit in a completely different way. Not just exposure, but expansion. This wasn't contained to my circle anymore. This had spread into other lives, other homes, other conversations I would never hear but would somehow always be part of. I ran a hand over my face, trying to ground myself, but nothing felt solid anymore. "So people I don't even talk to know details about my marriage," I said, more to myself than anyone. And Lauren whispered, "Not everything, but enough." Enough. That word echoed in my head like a verdict. I turned to Jenna again, and this time there was no confusion left in me, no hope that this could still be contained or explained away. "Do you understand what you did?" I asked her, and my voice wasn't loud anymore. It was steady, which somehow felt worse. "You didn't just lie to me. You let me become something people talked about." She started crying harder, shaking her head, reaching for me again, but I stepped back before she could touch me. "I didn't know he was sharing it," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought it was just between us." "Between you and him," I repeated, and the way she flinched told me she finally heard how that sounded. Lauren spoke again, softer now, like she was exhausted from carrying all of this. "Mike, there's one last thing," she said, and I almost laughed because I didn't know how there could possibly be anything left. "What else could there be?" I asked, and she answered in a way that made everything else suddenly feel like pieces of something much bigger. "He didn't just show people messages," she said. I felt my stomach drop again. "What do you mean?" I asked. And Lauren's voice broke completely when she said it. "There are recordings. I thought the worst part was knowing people had read about my life like it was some kind of story they could pass around. I was wrong, because recordings meant there were pieces of me, my voice, my words, my private moments, captured and replayed without me ever knowing they were being taken. For a second, I couldn't even respond. My brain just stalled, like it refused to process what that actually meant. "Recordings of what?" I finally asked, but my voice came out quieter than I expected, like I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Lauren didn't sugarcoat it. "Conversations, arguments, times you were venting. Nate said Jenna would sometimes record things and send clips to him." I felt something inside me collapse in a way that was different from everything before. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was invasion. This was my most vulnerable moments. Times I thought I was safe. Times I was frustrated, tired, maybe even unfair, being packaged and delivered to someone else for analysis, for judgment, for whatever they decided to do with it. I turned to Jenna slowly, and she was already shaking her head, crying harder than before, but I couldn't feel anything from it anymore. "You recorded me?" I asked, and I don't think I've ever sounded that empty in my life. No, not like that," she said quickly, stepping toward me again, her hands trembling. "It wasn't all the time. It was just when things got really bad. I didn't know how to explain it to him. I needed him to understand." I actually stepped back, further this time, because that explanation somehow made it worse. "So instead of talking to me, you documented me," I said, and she tried to reach for me again, but I shook my head before she could even get close. Lauren's voice came through the phone again, softer now, almost breaking. "Mike, I heard one of them," she admitted, and that hit me harder than anything else so far. "You heard it?" I asked, and she said, "Nate played it for us, at a dinner. He thought it was proof that things between you two were toxic." I felt my chest tighten so hard I had to grab the edge of the counter to stay upright. A dinner. People sitting around, eating, listening to my voice. Probably tired, probably frustrated, probably saying things I never imagined would leave the walls of my home, while they nodded along like they understood my life better than I did. I closed my eyes for a second, and all I could think about was how many moments had been stolen from me without my knowledge. How many conversations I thought were private had actually been shared. How many times I had trusted her with my honesty, my stress, my confusion, and she had turned it into something to send to someone else. "I was a joke," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone, and Jenna immediately shook her head. "No, you weren't. That's not what this was." But her words didn't even reach me anymore, because it didn't matter what she called it. It mattered what it was. I picked up my keys from the counter, not even fully aware of the decision forming in me yet, just knowing I couldn't stand in that kitchen another second. Jenna's voice followed me, panicked now. "Where are you going? Michael, don't leave like this. We need to talk about this." But I stopped at the door and turned back to her one last time. And for the first time all night, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel hurt. I just looked at her and said, "I don't think you ever actually loved me. I think you studied me." She broke down completely after that, but I couldn't stay to watch it. Because as I stepped outside into the cold night, one thought kept repeating in my head, louder than everything else. If this is what I've just found, what haven't I found yet?